A quiet town, a missing husband, and a woman haunted by memories no one else believes existed. But when she returns to uncover the truth, she finds something far darker. A secret so powerful, it can erase your past. While you're still alive, stay until the end. The truth will shock you. The wine hadn't spilled. That's what caught his eye first. A man lay lifeless on the floor, face pale and stiff, but the half-filled glass on the table remained upright, untouched. The storm outside roared, but the silence inside the room was deafening. Rain swept across the windshield in long, frantic streaks as the black sedan pulled into the gravel driveway. The crunching sound of tires on wet stone was barely audible over the thunder, but inside the car, silence sat thick between the two men. Julian Cross didn't speak unless something needed saying. He shifted his eyes toward the small, ivy-wrapped cottage at the end of the drive. It was dark, aside from a single porch light flickering slightly in the wind. Police tape glinted in the rain. This place feels like a murder even when no one's dead, Nate muttered, sipping from a steaming paper cup of bad gas station coffee. Like one of those cottages where you find journals with blood on the pages or some weirdo in the attic. Julian didn't respond. His hand reached for the door handle, smooth and deliberate. Nate sighed and followed. The moment Julian stepped out, the wind seized his coat, pressing the dark wool fabric against his tall frame. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth as they approached the entrance. A sheriff in a green raincoat greeted them with a nod. Detective Cross, thanks for coming out. Julian gave a brief nod, wiping a drop of rain from his brow with the back of his hand. Nate, still juggling his coffee, smiled politely. Evening, Sheriff, Nate said. Heard there was a dinner party. One guest didn't leave. The sheriff didn't smile. Victim's name is Gregory Hale, 40, lives alone, local painter. Wasn't supposed to have company last night, but we found a woman here. She says she was with him. Emma Lynn, his girlfriend. Julian's eyes drifted to the front window of the cottage. Behind the fogged glass, a faint silhouette sat unmoving. A woman. Still. Inside the cottage, the air was warmer but stale, as if grief had already settled into the wood grain. The furniture was antique but well kept. Deep brown leathers, lace doilies, and old oil paintings on the walls. The place smelled like cinnamon, pine, and something faintly metallic. The living room was intact. Neat. A half-eaten dinner for two sat cold on the table, and the wine bottle rested between the plates like it was still waiting for laughter that would never come. Gregory Hale lay on the floor between the kitchen threshold and the dining area. His skin had the pallor of someone who had died peacefully. Too peacefully. Julian crouched beside the body. No bruises, no wounds, no sign of a fall. Just a man who stopped being alive. What do we know? Julian asked without looking up. EMS. Says no signs of trauma. No vomit, no struggle. Heart just stopped. We're waiting on the tox report. His girlfriend called 911 around 10:43 p.m. Claimed he collapsed after dinner. Julian's eyes moved to the plate. Steak, mashed potatoes, green beans. All still warm in spots, but the wine glass, untouched. Nate was already poking around the bookshelf. I hate how cozy murder scenes are, he mumbled. Makes me wonder people even know they're dying, or if it just feels like a nap. Julian stood, eyes fixed on the glass. You don't drink wine with steak and leave it untouched. Maybe he was cutting back. Julian looked at him, unblinking. Nate cleared his throat. Right, nobody cuts back mid-dinner. Julian turned toward the hallway. The sheriff stepped in. Emma's in the back, still in shock. We put her in the guest room. She's been crying a lot. Kept saying it didn't make sense. He was fine. They were happy. Usual stuff. Julian nodded once. I'll talk to her. The hallway was narrow, lined with faded photos in antique frames. Most were landscapes, rolling hills, foggy lakes, the occasional deer. The guest room door was slightly ajar, light spilling softly into the hallway. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a heavy gray cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, strands clinging to her damp cheeks. A delicate silver cross hung at her neck. Her eyes were red, swollen but not wild. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, trembling. Julian stepped in, his presence calm but heavy. Nate lingered in the hall. Miss Lynn, Julian said gently. Emma looked up, startled, then nodded. You're the detective? I am, she sniffled. I don't understand what happened. We were having dinner, talking about stupid things. He was fine. He stood up to get something from the kitchen and he fell, and he didn't move again. Her voice cracked on the last word. Julian remained still, observing. Did Gregory have any health issues? She shook her head. No, he was healthy. He hiked almost every morning. Didn't smoke, barely drank. Barely, Julian asked. Just a little wine sometimes. I poured us each a glass last night. He didn't even touch his. Julian's gaze narrowed ever so slightly. Why? Emma blinked. He said it didn't feel right, that something tasted off. That was new. Julian sat on the chair opposite, her crossing one leg over the other. What were you talking about at dinner? She paused. Nothing important. He told me he was thinking of painting again. Said he hadn't felt inspired in months. And what did you say? I said, I was happy to hear it, that it made me proud of him. Julian didn't respond. Emma looked at her hands, voice smaller now. We were doing well. I know people. Think he was intense, but he was kind, gentle. He loved quiet mornings and old music, and he always made me feel like I mattered. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. Julian finally stood. Thank you, Emma. That's all. For now. Outside the room, Nate leaned against the hallway wall. She's either shattered or she's brilliant. Julian didn't answer. He walked past, eyes scanning every inch of the house on his way out. His fingers trailed lightly along the edge. The bookcase dust. Except for one clean rectangle. Julian paused. A missing book? He knelt, studying the shelf. The dust was uniform except where something had recently been removed. Not a large book. Something smaller. A journal. Back in the living room, Julian walked to the dining table again. The plates were cold. The wine, glasses still in place. One filled halfway, one untouched. He opened the wine bottle and sniffed. Nothing unusual. He poured a few drops into a separate glass from the kitchen, then dipped the edge of a silver spoon into it. The metal dulled slightly. Nate watched, arms crossed. Poison? Possibly, Julian said. Think she did it? Julian looked toward the hallway, then back to the table. He didn't answer. The storm outside thickened. Thunder rolled like drums in the hills. The sheriff stood near the door, flipping through his notepad. She say what time they started dinner. Julian nodded. Just after 9. He collapsed before 11. Neighbors didn't hear anything unusual.